the segregation between races,
Mhm.
white, black, separate, unequal, was very real. And black people, so-called African Americans, colored people, Negroes, had to enter right here to get on the train, on the same train. And they would often be riding up near the front engine where the smoke was coming on the train. That was where they would be placed and where they would be seated. So you had segregation in every aspect of society: segregation in transportation, segregation in hotels, segregation in restaurants, segregation in schools. Every aspect of society was it was literally illegal for black people and white people to be in a social setting or to be in the same space. I do Black History tours, and I've been doing them about 20 years now, I think. It's good to begin, as we do the tour, at the colored waiting room sign.
The sign is a visible reminder of the Jim Crow era in Macon, which lasted from the 1890s to the 1960s, a time marked by racial segregation, the denial of black voting rights, and mob violence.
The Jim Crow era was such a stifling, suffocating kind of situation.
And in some ways, it was worse than slavery. Whites in general were supporting a system that was designed to put white people ahead and put black people at the rear.
So humiliating. You just think about the term Jim Crow. You think about Jim Crow, you think about the minstrels. You think about a white man painting his face black to pretend to be black and pretend to be ignorant, pretend to be a buffoon or a savage. You think about that kind of mockery being, the term itself really represents, exemplifies the whole spirit of what was going on the entire time.
At my age, you stayed in a dominant black neighborhood. You didn't mix. I seldom seen a white person, and a white person seldom seen us, because we was in a dominant black schools, and we didn't know what they was doing, and they didn't know what we was doing.
My roommate came to visit, and we went to go for a walk after lunch, and moved up to where the pavement stopped and the dirt road began, and I turned around. And my roommate looked at me and she said, "Why aren't we going on?" And I said, "Well, we don't walk there." That was obviously, it was a black neighborhood. And so she was stunned, and so was I, because I hadn't quite realized how much I had absorbed of the culture that I knew that I shouldn't walk in that neighborhood. And that was only after a year.
Segregation had an economic purpose. It benefited white families and businesses by keeping black wages low, and the city and state spent less on schools and services for black residents.
Through most of that period, the state of Georgia was spending 4 times what it was spending to educate black children, 4 times that for white children.
The books that was hand-me-down books that had been torn with leaves and everything for us to use, and we weren't educated as well. The teachers that we had, whatever they could do with the material, that's what they worked with. We had very good black teachers.
Junior ROTC, they had to wear a uniform. And I remember telling my father as an 11, 12-year-old that when I went to high school, I wanted to be a part of wear that uniform. And of course, I remember the pain in his face when he had to look me in the eye and said, "No, you can't go to that school. That school is for white boys. It's for white boys only." I can quantify this, that decision, that racist decision to keep us segregated, to keep black kids out of the junior ROTC in Macon, Georgia, but yet we were drafted or joined and served in the same army. I entered the army as a private. My base pay was $78.10 a month from Macon, Georgia, as a black kid. Had I had the opportunity to go to Lanier and enter from junior ROTC, my pay would have been $145 per month starting.
These economic disadvantages led some Black Maconites to cross the color line.
Sometimes people would say, which one of your parents is Black? And, I would laugh and say, well, as far as I know, I'm just a white girl that grew up in Northern Virginia. So this is before the internet. This is before DNA testing. And when I finished college, I drove to Macon with my mother. My father had already died. And I went to the Washington Memorial Library and I asked if anyone had anything on the Persley family, Louis Persley, who was my uncle. And they come back with a folder. I'm thinking this is going to take like years and years and years of intense research to confirm that I have like a long lost, forgotten African-American relative. And I open the folder and the first page is about Louis Persley being the first registered African-American architect in the entire state of Georgia. So what happened, and the reason I didn't know about it, is because my grandfather, Louis's full brother, Dr. Alonzo Bond Persley Sr., passed for white. My great-grandmother, Maxie Bond Persley, the teacher, is connected to Joseph Bond, who was at one time Georgia's wealthiest planter. And he lived in Macon in that big yellow house that Mercer now owns, which was once called the Bond House. And he had thousands of enslaved people that I believe, I cannot prove this, but I'm fairly certain Maxie Bond's father, Alonzo Bond, who was formerly enslaved, was definitely a descendant of Joseph Bond. There was a study done on the census during Jim Crow that showed approximately 600,000 men passed for white. They can't fact check the women, all right? So if you think about my story is so common and most people don't know it.
Despite segregation, and perhaps because of it, some Black businesses and institutions thrived.
We have a peculiar ability to persevere in spite of. It's just something about our people that's in us to find a way.
In the late 1800s, early 1900s, Black people were more self-sufficient in our communities, and we could provide everything, but mainly because of segregation. We needed our own doctors, our own schools, our own laundromats, grocery stores, and that was happening. Cobblers would get shoe repair. Everything we needed, we could provide for ourselves. Paul Duval, he was an activist, but he was a businessman. He started an upholstery company back in the day. It was on Cotton Avenue.
My grandfather was born February 7th, 1863. And I tell the kids, I say he was born a slave. And my great-grandfather started an upholstery company in the Cotton Avenue era in 1883. And it lasted well over 110 years. And so we were in a family business. And Cotton Avenue was a very historic place for that era. It really was.
Cotton Avenue is like the Black Wall Street in the 1950s, 40s, 60s, and so many great institutions that were here, now gone, had doctors, physicians, attorneys. You had barbershops, you had pharmacies, you had doctors, you had restaurants, you had a dental building, the Walton building, that father-son, Dr. D.T. Walton Sr., Dr. D.T. Walton Jr., if you go to the front and really look at it carefully, was the head of the Bricklayers Local Number 4. They are the ones who established this building.
They had a reputation outside of Macon, as far north as Chicago, that people would like to hire brick masons post-Civil War who were trained here and who came here. And when you look at buildings like St. Joseph's that have those very distinctive pointy edges, but they're multiple pointy edges, those are called dog teeth. And I look at that and I see people.
St. Joseph's Catholic Church, the incredible brickwork there. Walter F. George School of Law. You can ride through downtown and look at the work of black masons and artisans, even City Hall itself. All of this here is a backdrop for what was truly a great area, a powerful area, a booming area of black business. Used to be a funeral home across the way that Ruth Hartley Mosley and her husband owned, Central City Funeral Home.
You have Ruth Hartley Mosley. This lady was doing it. She was an activist as well who contributed funds to help start Booker T. Washington Center.
When you have in a place, in a time where black people have nowhere to use the bathroom, but on the side of the road, black people have nowhere to eat but out of what they carried in their car. You can't go to a restaurant. Black people have no hotel they can stay in. Sleep in your car. You can't come in here. Charles Henry Douglas had the love to provide that for whomever comes through Macon, not only the local travelers and the local people, the regional travelers and the local people that live here, but the entertainers who were being demoralized. Charles Henry Douglas had the love for his people. He was a great man, and he built a theater, a beautiful theater.
Wesleyan was already taking a hard look at its history when I got there.
Yes.
That's what led to me actually arriving and to take some next steps and to help move progress, forward. And so when the Atlanta Journal-Constitution released a story about our past, it kind of forced us to jump onto telling our story.
You had terrible, terrible lynchings happening across the country, and you had a visibility of the Klan. There were students who sort of pretending to be Klan members, and they marched down the streets. They were dressed in Klan costume. It's a microcosm of what was happening across the city of Macon. And I think the difficulty now is to say, we've begun to look at this history more seriously, and now how does the city of Macon start to look at how pervasive some of the Klan activity was across the city of Macon at the same time periods?
Terrible things happening all around, lynchings, all types of horrible treatment, horrible things happening.
In World War I, the war to make the world safe for democracy, there were at least 3 lynchings in close proximity to each other after blacks had been involved in the U.S. Army. A young man named John Cocky Glover, who was inebriated and had a gun in a saloon in a tavern somewhere in Macon, critically wounded a police deputy or a sheriff's deputy who eventually died. They put him in the back of the police car, and very soon thereafter, a parade of about 400 people in cars met the police, demanded to be given access to the criminal. They beat him to death, or beat him almost to death, and they then riddled his body with bullets, put his body in the back of the truck, and proceeded to Macon, arriving back in Macon at dawn the next day to find a crowd of celebrating white Maconites who were waiting to celebrate the capture of Cocky Glover. The crowd ripped off pieces of clothing off the corpse for souvenirs, and they dumped the body in the lobby of the Douglas Hotel, which of course is a sign of resistance to black advancement. There was an editor of the Macon Telegraph, W.T. Anderson, who wrote a scathing editorial about this event, and the editorial was called Macon's Orgy. Anderson was still a segregationist, but the extremes of lynching and the extremes of the kind of gory souvenir taking that Maconites participated in, he denounced in a full-throated way. So there always were, even in the darkest moments, there always were a few people who were trying to push Macon in the South in a more progressive way.
You had groups like the Committee for Interracial Cooperation, where whites and blacks who came together, who could come together and discuss things on how to make changes slowly.
And Mercer University deserves a good bit of credit because it had maverick professors in the 40s and 50s, the most prominent of which was G. McLeod Bryan, who had a large group of Bryanites or disciples. He was one of the first to talk about ending segregation. The Macon Council on Human Relations was more tentative. It wanted to soften segregation. The NAACP published in a black newspaper or the black pages of the Telegraph an advertisement that said, "Smash segregation now."
When I was on the second floor of the Tubman Museum once with a group of third graders, we were talking a little bit about the Jim Crow era. We were talking about segregation. But it seems that, yes, we get it. We've learned about it in school. And some of them looked outside of the window from the second floor, and they could see something that said colored waiting room. And when they turned to it, they were like, oh, colored waiting room. Some of the parents were just, outraged, like, why is that there, whatever. I said, but look, do you see the difference in me telling them about it versus them looking at it for themselves and seeing it? Look at how it's affecting them, the impact of seeing that, and it's etched in stone over there.
For the greater good, for the entire town, we start by acknowledging who we are, how we got here, and who built the city, who helped build the city, how they contributed, and so forth.
It empowers you. It makes you feel better about yourself. It causes you to have a different sense of what your rights are. Your right to be, your right to be great, your right to stand tall, to stand strong because of knowing who you are and what you've come from and what you've come through. So all of that is a part of why I continue to do it.